Thank you for joining us on this Thursday. I'm Kelsey Wiskirkin. I'm Warp's Executive Director. And if you are new to Warp and our programs, Warp is Weave a Real Piece. We are an international textile networking organization, and we have members all over the world. And we're so happy to have you here today. I'll share Warp's website into the chat in case you're interested in learning more. And if you're new to Warp, welcome to you. And if you're a longtime Warp member, we're really happy to see you again. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's program and our first presentation. So today's panel discussion is focused on the textile traditions of Uzbekistan. We will delve into the exquisite textile traditions of Central Asia, led by Warp members who have worked closely with the craftspeople of Uzbekistan and the surrounding region. And our first speaker is Marilyn Romatka, who's a longtime Warp member. Marilyn's focus is living folk art crafts, and she teaches a wide variety of techniques, the common thread being that the techniques are all deep-rooted in a culture from around the world. She provides video classes, documentary and travelogues of folk art techniques at Taproot Video Online, which is her website that we'll share into the chat. And she has recently released her first feature-length documentary film entitled Interlacement, Threads and Lives. Today, she will be sharing about the process of ikat weaving in Uzbekistan, and this presentation is about 15 minutes of an hour-long program that she gives on ikat. So if the short version piques your interest, I'm going to be sharing the link for the full-length program into the chat. And with that, Marilyn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelsey. There are so many amazing textile techniques going on in Uzbekistan. But being given 13 minutes to talk to you, I'm going to try to focus on the making of the ikat cloth. So how to get the patterns to appear in this wonderful cloth. And let me share my screen. There it is. And I'm also going to turn off my video so that you can have all of the information coming at you be from the presentation and not from watching me do anything. So we are going to start out. Yeah, grand. I have to get that out of the way so that I can hit the play button. Very good. For the geographical orientation, I'll start out with a map. I'm talking today about Uzbekistan. If you can see my cursor, it's here on the left in kind of a rosy pink. It's used to be part of the old USSR, but back in the day, it was the thriving center of the ancient Silk Road. This tiny little outcrop here holds the Fergana Valley, and that's the part that I'm going to be talking about today. So what is this impressive cloth? The people of Central Asia, what with the beigeness of their steppes landscape, with the tans and the sand colors that they saw all around them, quite naturally wanted to drape themselves in all the color they could muster. And the technique that they chose for this textile exuberance? Ikat. Ikat is a way of producing patterned cloth, not by printing the design on once the cloth has been woven, no, but rather by encoding the pattern into the very threads while they are still threads before they ever approach a loom. This is ikat. The casual, unknowing observer will see the pleasing patterns, acknowledge them as lovely, and possibly think no more about them than to say, hey, that's pretty cloth. But the process of making these patterns appear, the saga, if you will, of making this cloth is an odyssey, well worth seeing. I have 13 minutes to show it, so this will be an abbreviated list of the steps. Let's look at the finished cloth before we start. As you know, the fuzzy edges of the cloth are the hallmark of the cloth and are very desirable. It shows the cloth to be handcrafted and not just a design printed on broadcloth. This is a close-up of that ikat. It'll help you understand the process if we think about the warp threads as a number of individual slices. I've sliced up this slide for you. These slices are usually 28 threads wide, and the Uzbek name for the slice is a lipid. So that's a new vocabulary word for you. Sericulture is a whole topic unto itself. I'll be skipping the steps involved in the raising of the silk moths and the reeling of the silk, etc., instead to spend my time on the ikat process itself. So we start the talk with silk strands ready to go, and it is luxurious. The silk is wound onto large cones and onto the biggest warping mill I've ever seen in my life. Once wound, the warp gets compacted into a white garbage bag that's sitting there on the floor. Now, this warp is 300 meters long. I asked him specifically. I said to the director, why stop at 300 meters? And he actually took my question seriously. He said, oh, after 300 meters, the pattern starts to shift. So then here we are at the compound of the next family, the next step in the process. Here, that compact bag of silk gets uncompacted and separated out into its lipid slices. It will be pulled and separated as seen in this next video. Here, the artisans thread the strands through a spacing stick, and then they separate out the entire length of silk into 100 separate slices of future cloth. The young fellow needs to be pretty strong. He's going to pull that plastic bag all around the entire path. Round and round and round it goes, making 100 identical lipid thread donuts, all lined up next to each other. That's a better picture of the spacing stick. And we end up with this. Once that's done, it's time for the sket to be put in. That's a new vocabulary word for you, another one. The sket is a single point that will stay white all the way through to the finished cloth and will be the anchor point from which the entire pattern will be gauged. Here's a quick jump into the future to show you what a sket looks like on a finished warp, tensioned out on the loom. And it's visible in the finished cloth, too. An ideal sket in finished cloth is fine and straight. But enough of the future. Let's get back to the narrative. After the sket is put in, the threads get the pattern sketched out onto them. And then the binding of the lipid slices takes place. They had a fellow doing a demo in the workshop of how it was done historically. And it happened just as you imagine. He binds cotton strands around any places that should remain white in the planned pattern to offer a resist to the upcoming dye bath. But standing just behind the guy doing the historic demo were the men doing it the way they do it today. Production ikat binding. Each individual lipid is placed on the hooks, rotated at high speed, and bound with Scotch tape. In the next step, the dye men dye the exposed parts of each lipid according to the plan for that cloth. Precision is the name of the game while dyeing because the threads will shift a bit in the making of the warp chain. That's the next step. It'll be dipped a number of times in order to get the deepness of color that they want. The next artisan gets the colorful lipid slices delivered to the courtyard. And the first step for him is to remove all that Scotch tape. Luckily, with the tape being sticky side out, the silk is not injured. And then we have this, which we found hanging all throughout his courtyard. The artisan will take these lovely individual hanks of silk and now compose the warp chain. So he and his mom open up the closed loops of silk, and slide them all onto a new frame, all in the correct order and lining them up according to that all-important reference point, the sket. There it is, the sket, at the same position on the frame. When he places them like this, he now knows that all the colors in all the lipids will lay in the correct placement to make the ikat pattern work. And then the whole enchilada is lifted up into the air. He gathers the first appearance of the sket together with the utmost care, binds it tightly, and pulls the resulting warp chain off the trapeze. Yeah, any weavers out there in the audience are getting weak in the knees at this point. Every time the sket appears, he binds it again to control the strands. And once he's done with the entire length, he chains up the silk. The warp is now prepared to produce pattern. The warp chain is an important step in cloth making. This is how we transport the warp to the loom in a controlled manner. I make warp chains off of my warping board at home too, but my warp length tops out at about 7 yards. At this point, the cross is formed by hand. Yes, the cross is formed by hand in the warp threads. The cross being the way that the threads are kept in the correct order going across the making of the cloth. The heddles must now be formed around the threads of the warp by the heddle maker. These control the raising and the lowering of the warp threads during the weaving. He makes string heddles around each of the strands, around each of the 2,800 strands, separating them into 4 distinct groups. Why 4 groups? Because this is just plain weave, and plain weave usually just needs 2 groups. Well, these are mighty fine threads. By splitting up the heddles into 4 shafts, and then having 2 shafts work together in tandem, there's space enough to accommodate everyone. And then it comes to the loom. This doesn't look a lot like the looms that we're used to in the US. For one thing, these looms can be some 30 feet long. A new warp comes in, and the reed is encased in the beater frame. The weaver stretches out the silk halfway across the width of the room. But instead of being rolled onto a warp beam under high tension like we're used to, the warp chain is simply hung up in a bag and thrown over a roller beam, which plays the part of the back beam of the loom. To tension, they grab a point of silk beyond the roller and weight the whole silk bundle with a fancy slip knot and hang a weight. Alternatively, the warp beyond the roller can be wound onto a stick instead of the plastic bag thing. The football method. Once the exposed warp is tensioned and straight, the weaver sprays it with starch for sizing. And spreads the sizing evenly along the warp, all the time chatting happily with the other weavers about the odd American with his camera and his fascination with what they see as everyday work. That's the shuttle she uses. The metal weight that you see dancing there is what tensions the warp. But it doesn't need to be so high-tech as a cast iron metal weight. See that weight? It's a bottle of water and a cement block wrapped in plastic. Do you ever wonder if our weaving lives here in the US are a little bit over-engineered? Look at that pattern dance. And after the warp is fully woven, and it takes a month to have that happen, then we finally have cloth. And off to the market we go. This part is such fun. Such variety. Such pride of craftsmanship. They sell ready-made clothing as well as cloth at the marketplace. Looking for that special outfit for that special occasion. From this amazing handcrafted cloth come wonderful garments. Some folks like the more traditional. Others, a more Western style. Uzbek ikat shines, no matter what style you use. Now that was a lot to grok in 13 minutes. This is just part of the program that I give to Weavers Guilds. If you'd like to see the process in more detail, Kelsey said that she had a link in the chat. Also, I do tours to Uzbekistan. I would love it if we could travel to Central Asia together someday. Thanks for your attention, and I can answer any questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was fantastic. Great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next presenter, who is Warp member Ricky Quintana. Ricky founded Hoon Arts Fair Trade and a Leap of Faith after retiring from her law career. Starting from zero as the first to build a U.S. market for Tajikistani handcrafts, Hoon Arts is now a verified fair trade business, working with artisan groups in 3 Central Asian countries, including Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. She also leads tours to Central Asia. Hoon Arts is helping to empower over 100 artisans, mostly rural women. And Ricky, we're so happy to have you here today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm so excited to see we have such a big crowd today. I will share my PowerPoint now, my slides. Let's see if I can get this all going correctly. Is everybody seeing that?
Looks great.
That's me at one of the famous monuments in Samarkand on the first tour that I led to Central Asia. That's the beautiful tile work that you always see in the photos of Uzbekistan. And the first question, Marilyn showed you one photo. The first question I'm always asked is, now, where is Central Asia? Where is Uzbekistan? She showed you a political map. I wanted to show you this map because if you can see my cursor, this flat area here, this is the Fergana Valley, which is now divided among 3 countries, but they were originally, for many hundreds of years, administered as a single political unit. And the mountains over here, the Pamirs, the Tian Shan Mountains, they've had a big influence on the development of culture and the textile traditions in this region. Here's another shot. We can see over here is Margilan. It's not marked, but I've got another one. But you can see that the 3 countries wrap around each other. And Marilyn talked about the ikat weaving industry over here. I will also talk a little bit about the Suzani embroidery tradition over here. And if you'll notice, there's a river here that starts in Tajikistan and runs through Samarkand and Bukhara. That's the Zarafshan River. And this river corridor is one of the latest UNESCO World Heritage sites. And there's the embroidery traditions along this river valley actually cross the border. And here, just for clarity, here's Margilan over here in this far eastern part of Uzbekistan. So the first question is, where is Central Asia? And the second question I'm always asked is, how did I end up working in Central Asia? As Kelsey mentioned, I started life as an attorney, retired with no expectations of being an entrepreneur, but I volunteered for a local organization in Albuquerque that hosts short-term professional exchange delegations. And we hosted 2 delegations from Tajikistan. And after figuring out where it was, like everybody else, I spent a week with these small groups of professionals. And the second group included Bakhruddin Isamutanov, who's works in handicraft promotion and ecotourism, which are both closely tied in Tajikistan and related in Uzbekistan as well. And I learned that nobody in the US was working to build a US market for Tajikistani crafts. And I just visited the international folk art market. I knew there were all kinds of resources. So at the farewell party for that second delegation, when I stood up to make my little farewell speech, I heard myself saying, well, I'll do it. I'll open the US market for Tajik handicrafts. And thank goodness I didn't know what I didn't know. These photos, this is a wonderful photo. Munira Akilova was the first artist I started working with in Tajikistan. She is also my tour leader, my local tour leader when I lead tours. Here is Aziz Mortazayev, who is in the room. He just landed in Tashkent, and if he could get enough internet access, he'll be able to present his talk live. But the master artisans in this part of the world, they know each other. And we met in Tashkent in 2022, which was a lot of fun. This is me with Munira and one of her community leaders. It turned out there was a very steep learning curve for me with Hunarts. It's a very niche market in the US, and I had to figure out the best way to access the customers in the US who would resonate with the Hunarts products. To show you a little of my lack of sophistication at the time, I thought if I built a website that customers would just show up. Well, it turns out that's not actually true. So I've spent a lot of time figuring out who my ideal clients are based on who actually buys, not who I think should buy. And it's a long game. I've been gradually learning the shows that work in the US for the type of handicrafts that I include in our inventory. I learned very early, but not soon enough to not take the leap, about the catch-22 of fair trade, which is that most of the best craft shows in the US that attract the types of clients who are looking for unique handmade crafts are not open to me because I am not the maker or the designer. And I only started the business to support the makers who typically cannot come to the US. Turns out live events and shows, including trade shows, can get very expensive, especially if you have to travel away from home. And one of the most important pieces of the learning curve once I started my business was learning what was most important to my artisans. And you may be thinking, as I did, well, they need a market, they need a market. But critical to all of the key artisan leaders that I work with is preservation of the cultural heritage of the crafts that they are working in. During the 70 years of the Soviet period, workers were directed to factories, and they were not allowed to have private businesses. And as late as the 1980s, weavers in Margilan, ikat masters, were being sent to prison merely for practicing their art. Had to learn about the structure of the US market and how business operates, the technology of e-commerce. I had to learn what Western buyers want and expect when buying handmade products from overseas. And that included a lot of training with organizations like Aid to Artisans. I'm a member of the Fair Trade Federation, and our own Cale Chappell, who's a member of WARP, also lives in Albuquerque. He was my mentor from the very beginning, which was a huge help. I've worked with business coaches and other advisors over the years. And I spent a lot of time working with my artisans to work toward producing products and business operations that meet those Western expectations. Lots of trial and error despite the training. One of the things that is the most fun for me is learning how to tell the stories of our artisans and learning what marketing works and doesn't work for my particular business. And that includes building relationships based on the right sales channels that actually produce sales and engagement. Turns out online marketing, social media marketing, is not actually the best or easiest channel for me, because my ideal clients typically don't do their shopping on Facebook. They're not looking for unique handmade items on Facebook, plus getting the attention of people who love handmade products is tough because of the way the social media channels work and the cost of advertising. Even among followers on Facebook or Instagram, for example, you will only be seen by 1 to 2% of your followers every time you post something. Learning to understand what my best clients value in the products, that includes quality, uniqueness, and they love hearing the real stories of the people, culture, and heritage behind the products, which is great for me because I've always loved show and tell. And a big part of building the business and staying with it over the last almost 10 years now has been learning the mindset tools that keep me going when it gets tough. And although I love the products and I love learning about the products, I love show and tell, what really inspires me, my most fundamental why around Hunart's Fair Trade, is a vision of a world where people everywhere recognize our common humanity and appreciate our beautiful diversity. And everything I do with the artisan, with my artisan partners, is a further step along that journey. My core values as a business include collaboration and authenticity. I was actually shocked to find that many fair trade businesses and many wholesalers in the US who buy handmade products from overseas use purely Western designs. They simply design in the West and then send the designs overseas and ask the artisans to produce them. But because my artisans are so committed to the preservation of the cultural heritage and the designs that in many ways are hanging on by fingernails in today's world, authenticity is central to what I'm doing as well. As I said, the artisan partners are the heart and soul of Hun Arts. As I said, I started with Munira Akilova. She is from Tajikistan, but the art of Suzani, as you'll remember, the Zarafshan River Valley, that the Zarafshan patterns and traditions cross the border. Samarkand is only about an hour west of Panjikent, where a lot of the artisans that Munira works with live. They live in Panjikent, they live in villages an hour's drive away up in the mountains. The technique that is emphasized now in Tajikistan is needle and thread. You'll see in a later picture that most of the Uzbek embroidery is not done with needle and thread, but is done with a tambour hook. But they use many of the same patterns and come from the same cultural tradition. And Aziz, who you'll hear from later, he's my contact, my ikat weaving master in Uzbekistan. The kimono jacket you see on the right was the result of a collaboration between the artists that Aziz worked with and the artists that Munira worked with in Tajikistan. We visited Margilan at the beginning of our tour in April, and I bought like 100 meters of ikat fabrics in different patterns while we were there, because Munira is not able to get the high quality Margilan patterns now in Tajikistan. Post-pandemic, those are not being imported because of border controls and cost issues. So we took the Margilan ikat to Tajikistan, and Munira had her tailor produce about 10 of these kimono jackets that came home with me. And that's one of them. This is the type of embroidery that is most commonly seen now in Uzbekistan. This is from the Samarkand, Bukhara region. One of the artists that I work with is Sanjar Nazarov. And you can see the large pieces, the large Suzani panels, as well as smaller panels. And these are pillow covers, but in the close-up, you should be able to see these very, very regular chain stitches. That's because they use a tambour hook. For those of you not familiar, it's like a crochet hook with a very, very tiny pointy needle. So the stitching is done by poking that hook through the fabric. It's maybe 30–40% faster than needle and thread, but it's not nearly as easy as it looks. We did some practice on our last tour, and there was nobody who found it easy on the first try. I've included a section here that I don't have time to go through, but knowing that there might be some overseas artisan groups or leaders of artisan groups on this call who are looking to enter the US market with their products, I included some slides, and you can have access to them later. I'm sure Kelsey can arrange for that. These are slides that I prepared for a talk that I gave through a USAID training program for artisans in Turkmenistan about what Western buyers expect when they are working with overseas buyers, particularly on the wholesale side. So choice of product type, quality production, colors and patterns, cost and pricing, communication and logistics, and extras that make a difference. You can look at those later, but I wanted to end that part of it with the single most important tip I have for artisans who are just starting to think about entry into the US market. It's a very challenging market. It's very large. It's very diverse. In many ways, it's overstocked. There is tremendous competition from China and from other low-cost manufacturers in various parts of the world. So my single most important recommendation would be, before you think about leaping directly into the US market or spending a lot of time, money, or energy on that, is to focus on your local international buyers first. Those would be diplomats, travelers, international business people, to start to develop relationships, start to develop products that are attractive to those international buyers, and work on building the business structure, the knowledge and skills that generate consistent sales to international buyers. As Kelsey mentioned, I lead tours. I've come up with this slide. I've got an online store where you can purchase products. I host a lot of live and virtual events. We have one coming up in Albuquerque at the end of September. I always try to post updates. We've done a number of virtual events, and we've been lucky enough since the pandemic to do live events with some of our artisan leaders, particularly Munira and Aziz, so they can appear live. Our next tour is planned for the fall of 2025. And I have a number of educational resources available on my website. If you want to subscribe to my bi-weekly blog and newsletter, you can do that on the website. And I have a YouTube channel that you can check out. And that's the end. How did I do on time, Kelsey?
Great, Ricky. Thank you so much. That was very informative. Okay, so our third presenter is Aziz. As Ricky said, he is just off of an airplane, so may still be in the airport, but I'm going to do an introduction, and then we'll see if he's able to share his sound and video and speak to us. Okay. So Aziz Murtazayev is the head of Marikat Weaving Cooperative located in Margilan, Uzbekistan, which is the Uzbek Center of Traditional Ikat and Silk Weaving. Aziz's individual artistic specialty is dyeing, and especially working with natural dyes. In addition to working with Marikat, Aziz has served as the most recent president of the Asia-Pacific region of the World Craft Council, as well as holding leadership positions in the National Organization of Craftsmen of Uzbekistan. In these positions, he works to create opportunities for Uzbek and other regional artisans, improve their skills and find new markets, as well as passing their skills to the next generation. So let's see, Aziz, are you here with us?
Hi, hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Great.
I just landed in Tashkent airport, and I'm on my way from the airport to my house in Tashkent. I'm very glad to see you all, and thank you for introducing me. So it's a great pleasure to working with Ricky, and we do ikat production in Margilan, and my production is with a team of 50 people, and our viewers are from rural and home-based viewers. So, but as you already seen, the very nice explanation of the process by Marilyn, it's very complicated process, and it's very time-consuming. And I try to give the job opportunities for my weavers from the villages and home base, so they can weave our ikats, continue their skills, and at the same time they can take care of the home and children. In our days, it's becoming very challengeable for us to compete, as Ricky told, the Chinese very cheap and printed ikats. And from day to day, and especially this year, we really felt how it was difficult for us in terms of many of artisans left or quitted this job because the local people, the public, because they don't much aware of this kind of hard work. They go for very cheap printed ikats, and they don't have much information about the processing, because Margilan city in east of Uzbekistan, and most of people from Uzbekistan, they just know that it is made in Margilan, but they don't know how it's made. And that's why they started buying these cheap printed ikats from China. And from day to day, the producers, they lost their markets, and they quit it from this craft. But for almost 20 years, I'm working with this craft in different ways, as promoting it and working. And most of my market was Western market, as Europe and US market. I was participating in folk art market, where I met a lot of new clients and a lot of friends, where we became friends. And also by bringing groups to Margilan, this also helps us to give more information about our crafts. And also in our age, it's very difficult to find young generation who are interested in crafts, because they mostly go for IT, for easier jobs. And we try to in some way to get them interested, as I this summer I was doing my dyeing process, and I invited my eldest son Ahmad to help me, and he was very excited, and he was in some way helping with my dyeing process, and he got interested, and he's very excited to do this together. But we usually were training our young people like usta shagird, which actually means master and apprentice. So the apprentices could learn from the masters for years all the skills, and they never were paid for this. But in our it is very difficult if you don't pay for your apprentice. That's why all what we train, and at the same time pay them. But also it is also very challengeable to find those young people. And I think Ricky and people like her doing and giving information and bringing groups. This also helps us to continue our work because I know it's very difficult, but at the same time, it's for us, it's more enjoyable and inspiration to continue this. Thank you. It was a bit short of my introduction, but I hope I will have another chance again.
Thank you, Aziz. Thank you so much for joining us when you're traveling. We really appreciate you being here. And I'm going to ask that anyone who has a question, please go ahead and start sharing your questions into the chat, and I'll help read those for the presenters. And in the meantime, Aziz, I have one question for you. You talked about recently teaching your son the process and also about the apprenticeship model. And I'm curious how you first learned the craft.
Oh, yeah, it's very interesting that in Margilan, like for years back, we were always doing this in our communities, in our mahala, and our neighbors were doing this. And by going and visiting our neighbors, we were watching and get interested and helping them. But after finishing the school and graduating from the university, I went to London and learned there more on online business and more on finance. And coming back, I started working with crafts and working with customers and getting their demands, and at the same time doing this together, your experience gets more and more, and you become also as an artist. And I mostly worked on natural dyes, and I can proud saying that I'm one of the good natural dyers on silk and wool as well. So I also more promote on doing the natural dye.
Wonderful. And while we're discussing natural dyes, can you tell us a few of the dyes that you use commonly?
Yeah, I always had the idea that that natural dyes should be like not always pastel or dull, but more of bright colors. And I achieved to getting these bright natural dye colors. And the locally we source like vegetable waste like onion skin, pomegranate skin, and also madder roots. And also at the same time, I import in indigo from India or from Thailand, because we don't grow indigo in Uzbekistan, but we actually had the test to grow it. And also cochineal, the cochineal I import from Peru, and sometimes clients in America, they also help me to source them. So out of these combinations, I get this red color, blue color, and I also use turmeric. Most of the people, they say that turmeric fades, but I also fix it with oak galls, so that helps me to keep the nice bright yellow color.
Wonderful. Thank you. I know a lot of people in our group are interested in dyes. There was one dye related question after you gave your presentation, Marilyn, that came just to me in a message. Can you talk about the multiple colors on one warp? How is that achieved? Are certain areas bound and then unbound, or how are those multiple colors achieved on one?
Yeah, so those of you that are dyers, you understand this whole thing. It's like with the pisanki eggs from Ukraine. You can over dye with darker colors if you start out with lighter colors. So obviously the first color you want to protect is white. And then you can either, because these things are individually, available to the dye molecules during the dye process where they were dunking it into the liquid, you can dye it piecewise that way, or you can take the entire loop, bound to protect white, throw it into a yellow dye bath, and then pull it out and it's all yellow except for the white that's under the Scotch tape. And then you can take and dye this little bit in red and that little bit in blue and that little bit in black. And according to the plan, of course, every lipid has its plan but they all work together to make beautiful music. And the very fact that they can keep this stuff clear in their heads while they're doing it is absolutely amazing. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And there's one more technical question that's related to the weaving process. So Jerry says, when picking up the cross, how do they tell which thread to pick up next?
Yeah, okay, so that's a weaver. So this is one of the points in the program when I'm speaking to Weavers Guilds that they cannot imagine. When we make a cross because you need a cross, the cross keeps the threads in line. They will tell each thread where it's going in the cloth. You need a cross. We put on a cross on the warping board. So before anything else happens, we make the cross and we maintain the cross and we protect the cross, and the cross serves us. In Uzbekistan, they put the cross in late in the program. And what he does is he looks at the entire mess in front of him. They tension the warp, they tension all the lipids, and he looks at it, and because he's very clever, he knows which one lives at the center of the cloth. And he says, oh yes, this is the lipid I want. He pulls it out. He does this thing on his fingers you saw him doing, separating it out. It's 28 threads. He puts 14 on one side and 14 on the other. He places a cross in them, and then he puts them on that thing that you saw. Look at it in the recording when you watch it again. He's got a little piece of string shaped like a chromosome with a knot in the middle and then bars hanging out, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. He puts the cross on the chromosome. That's the center of the cloth. That is the cross now. And then he looks into his bundle and he says, okay, where's that second lip of that? Oh yes, there it is. I pull it out. I do my little thing. I get the cross on my fingers. I place it on the chromosome. Then he goes for the third and he builds it out. You'll remember on the trapeze when it was coming around, it was half a pattern. Half a pattern. What he's doing when he makes the cross is he opens it up. He blossoms it open into a symmetric warp with a cross. I know it's hard to believe, but man, that's the way they do it, and they've got it perfected.
You're great at explaining the technique. Thank you. That was very clear. Okay, there's a couple of questions. It looks like we lost Aziz. So Ricky, knowing Aziz very well, maybe can help answer these couple of questions. So there's a question about collaboration with American Native artists and craftsfolk. So Ricky, why don't you let us know, have you seen any collaboration between your artisan partners? I don't know if I'm understanding the question, maybe when they're traveling to the United States, like Aziz traveling for Folk Art Market.
To this point, I'm not aware of any such collaborations, but the artisan leaders that I work with are all very open to collaboration. And that's actually been one of the challenges of working in this part of the world, is having lived under the Soviet system for 70 years. There was not an entrepreneurial culture. People fear competition, and collaboration is not a part of the culture that the living people grew up with. They're working on it, and both Aziz and Munira in their respective areas have done a lot towards building collaboration, but it is not natural for most of the artisans in that part of the world. But Aziz and Munira in particular are very interested and very open to collaboration. So if there were Native American artists here who wanted to build something new, I could certainly connect you. I will warn you that both Munira and Aziz are crazy busy. They basically have 3 jobs, all of them. And when I send WhatsApp messages in the afternoon, which is 11 or 12 hours time difference, depending on the season, I often get responses at 3 a.m. their time. So that they have very, very busy schedules, but they are they would love to look into collaboration. Munira tells a story that one of her first inspirations for working in the art world was when she visited the US I think she was in her late teens or early 20s, and they took the group to a reservation. I think it was the Pine Ridge Reservation, and they had a presentation on Native American arts, and the speaker was explaining the meaning behind the patterns and the color, and that inspired Munira to go home and start to learn about the meanings and the cultural history behind the artistic patterns in Tajikistan.
Well, that dovetails perfectly into another question that came in while you were speaking, Ricky. What inspires the patterns? Are there elements of geology or local plants that are represented? Do you know a bit about what Munira has learned?
In the ikat world, and in most of the Suzani, the embroidery, you will see floral patterns, plants, natural, water, mountains. They tend to be very stylized because Central Asia is Muslim for the most part. 99% of people have a Muslim heritage, and you traditionally do not represent living animals or living people
Openly.
in the artwork, in painting or any other artwork. So you get stylized versions of natural patterns and plants and natural features.
Great, thank you, Ricky. There was another question for Aziz that maybe either of you could speak to, either Marilyn or Ricky, since you're both familiar with the production and marketing that happens. So the question is there any problem obtaining natural dyes and quality silk for the weavings? And part of that question is, what is the bottleneck in the process? So what is the hardest part to fill other than customers, which you've already spoken to, Ricky?
Well, Aziz talked a little bit about the dyeing process, and he loves to work with locally produced, local natural dyes, but he does use imported dyes because the plants are not grown there. Shipping is very expensive. There are import controls shipping across borders, especially post-pandemic, has only gotten more complicated and more expensive for everybody. That's why he talked about customers making arrangements, customers bringing things. Suitcase shipping is wonderful. Silk, on the other hand, they grow the cocoons there. It is in Margilan, a large percentage of the population actually has a little room for growing silk cocoons, growing the silkworms every season, and it's produced locally, so they have plenty of access to silk. Although there has been in the news some recent concern that about whether the cocoon growers are really being treated fairly from an economic standpoint, whether they're paid, whether they're forced to grow. I mean, it's not like you're going to be put in jail if you don't grow the cocoons, but there is an expectation, and that may shift in the future. I don't know. I've been reading more articles recently about concerns about the equity of the way the silk is grown in the region.
Of course, what Uzbekistan is known for is cotton. During the Soviet era, that was the job, was growing cotton for the entire union. And they're very good at it. There's cotton I go in the fall, and there's cotton being harvested in the the fields everywhere. We stop the bus and we get out and harvest some cotton of our own. It's just everywhere you can. And then they make these mountains of cotton, and you drive by them, and it's quite something to see. It's unbelievable the amount of cotton production there.
And during the Soviet period, they would close factories and close schools and send people out to harvest the cotton. And there was no payment. It was just part of your civic duty to harvest the cotton. And it's interesting, the last time I was there, we talked to several people who harvested cotton in their youth, and they have this wonderful nostalgic memory of their friends from high school going out and harvesting together and getting out of the classroom. That is no longer the system for harvesting cotton. And that has actually been a major issue in world acceptance in recent years of cotton production in Uzbekistan. And they have just recently lifted an embargo on Uzbek cotton because they've eliminated the forced labor component, but it's still a controversial crop because it's very water intensive, and this is a very dry part of the world. And the cotton production is a big part of why the Aral Sea is almost gone.
Thank you for sharing about that. There's we're a little past the hour, so I'm going to take this one question that might be really important to anyone who owns any ikat. So the question is specifically ikat jackets that need to be laundered. What is the best way? And is there any concern about dye bleeding into undyed white areas?
Okay, I just got done yesterday washing some ikat, getting ready to make into a garment. And my word to you is watch out. We're wash and wash and wash and wash and wash. Yes, it bleeds. And if you have a jacket that's already made, I would say, hey, let's do some dry cleaning, because yeah, don't trust the colors.
I see Ricky nodding, so you would agree, Ricky?
Yeah, some of the production, they've fixed the colors and fixed the dyes pretty well, and you can get away with some cool water hand washing, but I wouldn't trust it for any random piece of ikat fabric.
Okay, thank you. There were a couple of other questions about tours, about apprenticing. We are going to end the program, but I'm going to send a follow-up email that will have Marilyn's contact information and Ricky's contact information and information for Aziz. So please feel free to reach out to them with any questions that you have. Obviously, they're very knowledgeable and we'll be happy to talk with you. Both lead tours if you're interested in traveling to Uzbekistan and the area. So Marilyn and Ricky, thank you so much for being here today. This was very informative and just a real delight to hear from you.
I always love show and tell, so.
Great, thank you. Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was great. Yeah.